The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Every creak of a chair, every shuffle of paper, echoed like thunder. The air hung thick with tension, but not the kind that came from justice being served. This was the tension of abandonment betrayal. Eyes were on the defendant's bench where Nathaniel Quinn, once hailed as the visionary behind the nation's fastest-growing clean energy startup, sat alone. His tailored grey suit looked stiff on him, not because of its price tag, but because it no longer fit the man's posture. Shoulders slumped, jaw tight, eyes scanning the door over and over again, as if willing someone to walk through it. The judge glanced at the clock, his gavel tapping in slow warning beats. "Mr. Quinn," he said firmly, voice bouncing off the marble walls, "if your counsel does not appear within the next 2 minutes, I will have no choice but to delay this hearing, or proceed without defense." The prosecution team smirked, almost relishing the moment. After all, what chance did a man regardless of his wealth stand, when even his own lawyer had walked out on him hours before trial? What the world didn't know was that Nathaniel Quinn hadn't slept in 3 nights, not because of fear for himself, but because he knew what was truly at stake. It wasn't just his company on the line, it wasn't just his reputation. Hundreds of employees, families, dreams, they all sat on that bench with him, invisible, but painfully real. In the back row of the courtroom gallery, mostly filled with reporters and former associates who once praised Nathaniel and now waited to see him fall, a soft figure sat nervously. Her name was Eliza Hart, not a lawyer, not an executive, not even a personal assistant. Eliza was his junior archivist. Her official role, to scan old documents into a digital filing system and organize boxes of past patents and legal files. Her salary barely covered rent. No one really noticed her. She wasn't supposed to be here, but Eliza had noticed something. Something in the thousands of documents she'd quietly processed over late nights and coffee-fueled weekends. Patterns, gaps, names, odd signatures. She didn't fully understand what it all meant until she heard that the company's trusted legal team had quit without warning, just days before the trial. What haunted her most wasn't the silence of the office halls afterward. It was the way Mr. Quinn had looked at her when he asked if she could print some files, not like a boss, talking to an employee, but like a man trying not to drown in a storm, reaching for anything that might float. She had almost turned around and gone home. What could someone like her possibly do? And yet, here she was, with a manila folder pressed to her chest so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Inside were documents she hadn't shown anyone, not even Nathaniel. She had no law degree, no right to even stand near the front of the courtroom, but she had something stronger, conviction. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Quinn, last chance. Where is your counsel?" Silence. The door remained shut. The chair beside Nathaniel, empty. Then movement. Heels clicked softly on the polished courtroom floor. Heads turned. Whispered confusion swept through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Eliza walked forward, not confidently, not like a seasoned attorney, but with a quiet, fierce determination that didn't need to be loud to be powerful. "I'll defend him," she said. Her voice was calm, but it sliced through the air like lightning. The judge blinked. "Excuse me." She stepped beside Nathaniel, her hand resting on the folder, eyes never leaving the bench. "I'm not a lawyer, Your Honor. I know that, but I have evidence, real evidence. If you allow me to speak, even just for 5 minutes, I believe I can show this court that Mr. Quinn has been set up." Gasps, laughter, disbelief. The judge's mouth tightened. "This is highly irregular, but not illegal," Elisa replied. "There's no legal counsel present. There's no motion filed. Nothing prevents me from presenting facts to support a defense. Does it?" Nathaniel looked at her for the first time, really looked, and behind the fog of stress and betrayal, something flickered in his expression: hope. The judge leaned back, studying her. 5 minutes, that's all. And just like that, a quiet archivist no one had ever noticed stood up in front of a courtroom ready to watch a man fall, and dared to change the ending. No one saw it coming. But what Eliza was about to uncover would not only shock the court, it would expose a truth buried deep beneath power, profit, and betrayal. Because sometimes, the real heroes are the ones who were never meant to speak until they choose to. ChatGPT said. For a few seconds after the judge granted her 5 minutes, time seemed to stall. Even Eliza could feel her own pulse echoing in her ears. She knew she had just crossed an invisible line, one that could either destroy her or define her. She placed the folder on the defense table and opened it with trembling fingers. Dozens of scanned contracts, internal memos, and transaction records lay inside, carefully arranged in the order she had spent 2 weeks reconstructing in secret. The judge leaned forward, skeptical. "Miss Eliza Hart, I work in Mr. Quinn's archival department," she said, steadying her voice. "I don't have legal training, but I do know what I found." There was laughter in the back, mocking. From the prosecution table, a thin man in a navy blue suit with perfectly gelled hair stood. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We can't allow some file clerk to derail a federal fraud case." The judge raised a hand to silence him. "Mr. Reed, you had no objection when Mr. Quinn was left without representation. Let's hear what she has." Eliza didn't flinch. She pulled out the first document and walked it to the judge, her heels clicking softly on the floor, every step feeling like it carried the weight of a mountain. "This is a purchase agreement," she explained, "between Quintech and a company called Meridian Systems. It's dated 8 months ago, but Meridian Systems didn't exist until 4 months ago." That sparked whispers. Even the court clerk looked up from his computer. Nathaniel shifted slightly beside her, brows furrowed. This was new to him too. Eliza handed the next document over. "This one is an invoice for proprietary technology supposedly sold by Quintech, except this patent." She held up a second sheet was never transferred. In fact, it's still registered under Mr. Quinn's name. No sale ever happened, but Meridian Systems submitted that invoice as evidence of fraud. Judge Thompson narrowed his eyes. "Are you suggesting that the prosecution's evidence is fabricated?" "I'm not just suggesting it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm proving it." More laughter this time, nervous, uncertain. The courtroom had never seen anything like this before. A junior employee, unraveling the narrative thread by thread. People had come expecting a downfall, but now they were leaning in. Something was happening, something real. Eliza walked back to the table, flipped a few more pages. She had spent sleepless nights piecing these documents together, cross-checking signatures, timestamps, file method. She'd even caught a forged signature that had been copied and pasted with a slight tilt. It wasn't just sloppy, it was desperate. And then, finally, she laid down the document that made even the opposing counsel freeze. "This," she said, her hand flat on a printed email chain, "is a conversation between 2 executives at Meridian Systems. In it, they discuss creating a paper trail to falsely accuse Mr. Quinn of diverting funds. They mention a bonus if the deal goes through quietly. The last email is time-stamped 1 day after Quintech's former CFO resigned without warning." The silence in the room turned electric. Eliza didn't need a badge or a title anymore. She had something more powerful. With the judge scanned the papers, frowning deeper with each line. He turned to Reed. "How do you explain this?" The prosecutor looked pale. We were not made aware of this information, Your Honor. This is clearly an attempt to distract the court." "No," Nathaniel said, his voice rising for the first time. "This is what happens when good people get tired of watching others lie." Eliza turned toward him. He was no longer the worn-out, defeated man who had walked into that courtroom. Something in him had reawakened, and all it had taken was someone no one noticed, someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose, standing beside him. The judge leaned back in his chair, glancing between the documents, the prosecution, and Eliza. Then he said something no one expected. "This court is hereby postponing proceedings until a full review of this new evidence is conducted. And I suggest both sides prepare for what's coming next." A gasp ran through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The spell had broken and the story had just turned on its head. As they stood, preparing to leave, Nathaniel whispered, "Why did you do this? You didn't owe me anything." Eliza hesitated, then answered quietly, "Because I know what it feels like when no one believes you, and I know what it means to finally be heard." He looked at her, a rare softness behind his usually steely eyes. "You just may have saved my life." Outside the courthouse, the summer heat was rising, but inside, a storm was only beginning to form. Eliza had poked a hole in something much bigger than one lawsuit. What she had uncovered wasn't just a setup, it was a conspiracy that went deeper than she or Nathaniel ever imagined. And the people who had engineered it, they weren't going to stay quiet. Because when truth walks into a room no one expected it to, it doesn't knock, it kicks down the door. Eliza had opened that door. Now, The real fight was about to begin. Asterisk. The media swarmed the courthouse steps before Eliza and Nathaniel even made it outside. Microphones stretched like arms from every direction, reporters shouting over one another, desperate to attach their voice to what was now the most unexpected legal twist of the year. Miss Hart, did you just expose a fraudulent case against your own boss? Eliza, are you officially joining the defense team? Nathaniel, is it true your own lawyer fled after being bribed? They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The truth was already whispering its way through the wires of every news station and blog. Headlines were changing before their eyes from Billionaire faces justice. To whistleblower employee may have turned trial upside down. But while the world was just catching up, Eliza knew something others didn't. What they had seen in court that morning was only the surface, a corner torn from a page in a much larger book. And that book wasn't finished. Inside the back seat of a town car Nathaniel had summoned in haste, they sat side by side, silent. The city blurred outside, the window as it pulled away from the courthouse, but Eliza wasn't looking out. She was replaying every moment in the courtroom, every line she had spoken, every flicker of doubt or strength that had crossed her face. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? She glanced at him. Would you have believed me if I had? He hesitated. I don't know. Maybe not. That's why I waited. I couldn't come to you until I had everything, until I knew it was real. Nathaniel looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as an employee, but as someone standing in front of a crumbling tower, refusing to let it fall without a fight. When they reached his office, the building was already buzzing. Staff had gathered in the lobby, eyes wide, whispering in corners. Some were surprised Eliza was with him. Others simply nodded, as if they understood something had shifted. They rode the elevator in silence to the top floor. Once inside his private office, Nathaniel dropped his briefcase and turned to her. Tell me everything. Elisa didn't sit. She opened the folder again and pulled out more documents she hadn't yet shared. There's a trail of emails between our former CFO and a shell company overseas. They were laundering our tech through dummy partnerships. One of those partners sits on the board of Meridian Systems. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. They were working together. And I think your lawyer knew, she added. There's a message from his assistant encrypted, but I decrypted a portion. It mentions a last payment the day before he disappeared. He didn't walk away from your case, Mr. Quinn. He was bought off. He sank into his leather chair. This is bigger than I imagined. There's more, Eliza said, her voice quiet now. This wasn't just about bringing you down. It was about taking the company, its patents, its reputation, everything. Meridian wanted Quintech out of the way. Nathaniel rubbed his face, weariness settling into his bones. How long have you known? I started putting it together 2 weeks ago. I stayed late every night. I couldn't sleep. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't ignore it. A long silence stretched between them. Then, something changed in his voice. You could have taken that file to the press. You could have sold it. You could have walked away and let me fall. I didn't want to see something good destroyed, because no one was willing to speak up, she said softly. You believed in a future that helps people. I couldn't let them take that away. Nathaniel stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're not just a file clerk anymore, Eliza. She gave a small smile. I never was. Later that night, as Elisa sat alone in her modest apartment, the weight of everything finally began to sink in. Her phone buzzed, non-stop messages from friends, unknown numbers, even offers from law firms, but she ignored them all. Instead, she focused on the next step, because what they'd done in court wasn't the end, it was only a warning shot. The real battle was coming. The conspirators weren't going to sit quietly now that someone had poked holes in their carefully story. And Eliza knew something else. Two people like that didn't just retaliate in courtrooms, they retaliated in silence, in shadows, in ways that didn't leave a trail too. When the email arrived at 11:52 p.m., she didn't delete it. No subject line, no sender, just a single sentence. You should have stayed in your place. She stared at it, heart pounding, but only for a moment, because what the sender didn't know was that she'd already decided. She was never going back. Asterisk. The next morning, Manhattan woke up to a new headline, Whistleblower or Hero. The archivist who challenged a billion-dollar conspiracy. Eliza didn't even need to look at her phone. Her name was already being whispered in coffee shops, typed in online forums, and scrolled across every screen in the city. But while the world argued over whether she was brave or reckless, Eliza was already back at Quintek's headquarters than usual, wearing the same navy coat she'd worn in court, hair pinned back with sharp precision. She moved with quiet purpose through the glass-walled office floor, passing colleagues who now stopped their conversations just to watch her walk by. She wasn't invisible anymore, and strangely, that felt far heavier than before. Nathaniel met her at the door to his office. He looked tired, but more alive than she'd seen him in weeks. "They know we're serious," he said without greeting, "and they won't let it go." "I know," Eliza said, stepping inside. "I got a message last night. No name, just this." She handed him a printed copy of the email. He read it slowly, then sighed. "They're trying to scare you." "I'm not scared," she said quietly, "but I am prepared." He looked at her with a kind of respect that had nothing to do with her title, and everything to do with her fire. They sat down with the legal team and emergency group Nathaniel had assembled overnight. Trusted allies, a few former prosecutors, people with nothing to gain by covering up lies. Eliza handed over everything she had: new email logs, timestamps, metadata, even shipping invoices that pointed to offshore transfers connected to Meridian systems. One of the lawyers, a woman named Dana with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked over the papers and whistled. "You just walked into the center of a firestorm, Miss Hart. This is organized fraud on an international level." "I know," Eliza replied, "but it doesn't stop there." She opened a separate folder. Inside were internal memos she'd retrieved late the night before, buried in backup servers. Among them one signed by the former CFO, subtly authorizing a quiet transfer of company assets under a fake subsidiary. The name of that subsidiary: Brightwell Ventures, the same holding company listed under the real estate documents of the Quintek building itself. Dana blinked. "Wait, they're not just taking the patents, they're trying to seize the entire company." "They're already halfway there," Eliza said. "And the lawyer who walked out on Nathaniel, he's on their board. I traced the financials myself." The room went still. For a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Nathaniel sat back in his chair, stunned. "They weren't just trying to destroy my reputation. They wanted everything. The company, the tech, even the building. They thought if they made you look guilty enough," Eliza said, "you'd be forced to settle, forced to walk away, and they'd swoop in to salvage what was left." Dana looked at her. "You understand what kind of storm this opens up?" "I do," Eliza answered. "Then we have to go bigger," Nathaniel said, his voice suddenly strong. "Public. We go to the Department of Justice. We call a press conference, and we get ahead of them before they bury us." That afternoon, under the glare of cameras and reporters, Nathaniel stood behind a podium, not as a man defending himself, but as a man reclaiming his voice. But when he finished his statement, when the press leaned forward for the next big quote, it wasn't him who stepped up to the microphone, it was Eliza. "I'm not a lawyer," she said into the sea of flashing lights. "I'm not a corporate executive. I don't wear expensive suits or have my name on a glass door. But I know what the truth looks like, and I know what it feels like when someone tries to hide it." She held up a copy of the email chain between the shell companies. This is what corruption looks like. This is what happens when the powerful think no one will notice what they're doing in the dark, but someone always does. It wasn't a performance, it was a promise. When the conference ended and the footage hit every major outlet within hours, the response was overwhelming. Public opinion shifted in real time. Employees who had once stayed quiet now began sending Eliza messages, documents, even screenshots of suspicious memos they'd ignored for months. But with the spotlight came something else, a shadow. That evening, when Eliza returned to her apartment, she found the door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, nothing broken. But every drawer had been opened. Every file, touched and taped to a refrigerator, was a note written in messy block letters. "You're not ready for the rest of the truth." Eliza stood in the center of her kitchen, heart racing, breath shallow. She knew then what they'd uncovered was only the beginning. Someone else was watching. Someone else had something to lose, and the secret they were protecting wasn't just about fraud, it was about a truth buried deeper than any file could reach. But Eliza had come too far to stop now. She wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was ready to meet it face to face. The police didn't take the note seriously. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, just a quiet suggestion that maybe she'd left the door open herself. Eliza knew better. Someone had been in her apartment, someone who wanted her to know they'd been there. It wasn't a warning. It was a test. A line drawn in shadow to see if she'd cross it. And she did. The next morning, Eliza didn't go to the Quintek office. She took the train to an address that had been written at the bottom of one of the Shell Company invoices, an industrial warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, listed under Brightwell Ventures. The invoice had been buried deep, a single line item among hundreds. But something about it had bothered her. A shipping manifest with components that didn't match any Quintek project. Too vague, too expensive, too carefully worded. She wore a plain coat, no name badge, hair tucked under a knit cap. From the outside, the warehouse looked abandoned. Dust on the windows, rust curling along the edges of the loading dock. But inside it was alive. Men in uniforms, private security guarded the perimeter. A cargo truck idled near the entrance, and just past the open loading bay, Eliza saw crates marked, not with Quintek, but with a different logo, one she didn't recognize. A stylized Meridian Systems. Her breath caught. She stepped back behind a row of dumpsters, pulled out her phone, and started filming. This wasn't just evidence, it was the missing link. Whatever Meridian was building, whatever they'd siphoned off Quintek's resources to create it, was happening here, under everyone's radar. And if Eliza hadn't traced that one shipment, no one would have found it. As she filmed, a voice behind her made her freeze, looking for something. She turned slowly. A man stood behind her in a long coat, unshaven, calm, not threatening yet. But there was something about his stillness that unsettled her. "I'm just waiting for a ride," she lied. He smiled. "Strange place to wait." "I like the view." He glanced at her phone, still recording behind her scarf. "Turn that off. I don't know what you're talking about." He took a step forward. "You're not going to stop this. You think you're doing something brave, but you're playing in a field you don't understand." Eliza's pulse thudded in her ears. "Then explain it to me." But he didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long second, then slipped something into her pocket. "A flash drive. You want the rest of the truth," he said. "This is where it starts, but it won't end the way you think." He walked away, vanishing into the shadows behind the warehouse. Eliza stood frozen, heart pounding. When she finally opened the drive that evening alone, laptop unplugged from Wi-Fi, blinds drawn, she found something that made her blood run cold. A private video conference, a conversation between three men: Quintek's former CFO, Nathaniel's missing lawyer, and a third man, a man she hadn't seen before. But she recognized the voice. She'd heard it once. Years ago, during a company meeting, a guest speaker, brought in by the board. At the time, he'd seemed polished, inspirational, forgettable. Now, she knew better. He wasn't just some consultant. He was orchestrating everything. That, in his final words, before the video cut to black, would haunt her. "We don't need to destroy Quintek. We just need to make him give it to us." Eliza slammed the laptop shut. Nathaniel had never known. This wasn't just about fraud. It was a corporate heist, slow, methodical, and brilliantly designed to look like collapse. They weren't just framing him. They were making him believe he'd already lost. The next day, she walked into Nathaniel's office with the drive in her hand. "I need you to trust me again," she said. He looked up from his desk, exhaustion in his eyes. "I always did." Eliza inserted the drive into his laptop. The video played. She watched his face shift from confusion to anger to something deeper, betrayal, not just of his business, but of people he'd once called allies. "How much of this do you have?" he asked when it ended. "Enough," she said. "But not everything. You're saying they'd been planning this for years." "Yes, they made it look like you were the failure. They made you question yourself. But the whole time, they were poisoning the company from within." Nathaniel stood. "We're taking this to the board. All of it." She shook her head. "No, we can't. Not yet. If even one of them is involved, we'll lose the element of surprise. We need to go deeper." Quietly, he nodded. "So what's the next step?" Eliza hesitated. "We find out who that man is. The one in the video." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "You think he's the real architect?" "I think he's the one who convinced everyone else to fall in line." Nathaniel picked up his phone, dialing someone on speaker. "I'm calling in a favor." As the line rang, Eliza stared at the Manhattan skyline through the office window. Somewhere out there, the man in the video was waiting, believing. No one had connected the dots. But he was wrong, because Eliza had. And this time, she wasn't just going to expose the truth. She was going to finish what she started. Asterisk, it began with a name. The man in the video, the one orchestrating the betrayal from the shadows, was identified within 2 hours by Nathaniel's private investigator. His name was Vincent Hale, a venture capitalist with no public ties to Quintech, but a long history of acquiring struggling startups just before they hit bottom, and flipping them for billions once he'd taken control. Vincent didn't destroy companies, he seduced them into surrender, and now he had his eyes on Quintech. Nathaniel stared at the file for a long time. "I've shaken hands with that man." Eliza nodded. "He's been in this longer than we've known. This was never just about money. It was about power, about legacy." Nathaniel's voice was calm, but sharp. "Then let's take that power back." They devised a plan, one that would rely on precision, timing, and trust. Not in lawyers or CEOs, but in the same quiet integrity that had brought Eliza this far. She wasn't a legal expert or a whistleblower by training, but she was relentless, and now she had something stronger than evidence. She had a confession. One night, using a secure line and encrypted software provided by Nathaniel's tech team, Eliza made contact with someone inside Meridian Systems, an anonymous employee. The person claimed to have been part of the data transfer operation paid under the table to reroute sensitive Quintech intellectual property into Vincent Hale's dummy subsidiaries. "I didn't know what I was part of," the voice said, "but I kept the logs, every timestamp, every server path. I'm tired of hiding." The logs arrived the next morning, and with them, a map clear as day how the betrayal had been carried out. It wasn't just documents anymore. It was digital fingerprints, IP traces, financial flows, a perfect chain of cause and effect. But they needed more than proof. They needed to catch Vincent in the act. So Eliza did something bold. She offered him a deal. It was dangerous, reckless, but necessary. Using a dummy email address, she posed as a former Quintech systems analyst, disgruntled, hungry, willing to sell access to archived patents Nathaniel had supposedly buried. The bait, a fictional file codenamed Horizon Eco, something that sounded too valuable to ignore. Vincent responded within the hour. His reply was short, calculated. "Meet me, midnight." No digital trail. The location, an old private lounge on the upper floor of a luxury hotel, abandoned, being renovated, but still connected to the hotel's power and cameras, many of which Nathaniel's team had quietly reactivated. Eliza arrived first, wearing a wire, carrying a briefcase with nothing but blank files and a digital timer, rigged to alert Nathaniel the moment it was opened. When Vincent arrived, he was just as calm, just as charming as he'd been in the video. He didn't recognize her, why would he? To him, she was just a ghost in a chain of paper. "Let's not waste time," he said, setting down his drink. "I don't plan to," Eliza replied smoothly, passing him the briefcase. "Everything's in there." He opened it. The timer activated. In that moment, a live feed began transmitting everything to a secure server. Every word, every expression, every smirk. Vincent said, sipping casually, "When this company collapses, I'm going to buy it for 1/10 its value, rebrand it, flip it, and no one will even remember your name." Eliza smiled faintly. Funny thing about names, sometimes they're the only thing that survives. He looked at her, puzzled. She leaned forward. "My name is Eliza Hart. I work for Nathaniel Quinn, and I know exactly who you are." His smile cracked, just slightly. "You've made a mistake," he said. "No," she replied. "You did when you underestimated a woman who reads every single line." The door burst open. Federal agents, Nathaniel behind them, the warrant in hand. Vincent didn't fight. He just sat back, face unreadable. Because men like him didn't panic. They waited for lawyers, for loopholes, for silence to work in their favor. But this time, silence wouldn't save him. Not with the surveillance footage, not with the signed memos, not with the employees who now stepped forward, empowered by Eliza's example. That the case hit national news within 48 hours. Corruption unveiled at the top. How one woman stopped a corporate coup. Nathaniel Quinn was cleared of all charges. Not because he paid someone off, not because of some clever technicality, but because one employer woman most people had never noticed stood up when no one else would. In the days that followed, offers came in, interviews, book deals, non-profits asking Eliza to speak. But she declined most of them. Fame wasn't what she'd been after. She returned to Quintec quietly, standing beside Nathaniel as they rebuilt from the ashes. Together, they rewrote the company's code of ethics. Together, they offered new training, transparency, and protections for employees who dared to speak truth. One evening, as they watched the sun set from the rooftop of the headquarters, Nathaniel turned to her. "You didn't just defend me," he said. "You saved everything I built." She looked at him, then out toward the city she'd once felt invisible in. "No," she said, "I just reminded them that the smallest voice can still change everything. And somewhere out there beneath the noise, behind the power suits, and polished glass towers, another Eliza would one day rise, armed not with titles or status, but with truth, and that would always be enough."